We've all, at one point or another, believed some pretty outlandish FNaF theories, but with all the information we have nowadays, it's fun to revisit those old theories. Welcome back to FNaF Throwback Theories, a series where I talk about 3 of my old FNaF theories, talking about the evidence I used for them, whether or not they made sense for the time, and whether or not they still make sense today. This is episode 2 of the series, and after the first video was basically about me shitting on myself, I thought it would be nice to look at some of my older theories that I think were actually pretty good, whether true or not. So, let's get started with FNaF Throwback Theories, episode 2. All 3 of the theories that I'm going to talk about in this video have to do with the Fazbear Frights books. 2 of them are much more recent, actually coming out shortly after FNaF Security Breach came out, but they're still dated enough that talking about them here makes sense. But as I said, while I disagree with some of these theories, I think that they did have some pretty good evidence and I can totally see why I believed them. The first theory is one that I made pretty soon after Security Breach came out. When I first played Security Breach, I actually came up with the idea of Gregory being a robot before I even heard about MatPat coming up with the idea. So when MatPat released his video talking about Gregory being a robot, I was a bit sad that he talked about it first, as I had been working on a theory on it as well, but the theory ended up instantly getting a ton of backlash. While today I do think a lot of the evidence people use to say Gregbot is not true is pretty flawed, at the time I ended up latching onto the evidence of Gregory's blood. This started getting talked about shortly after the Gregbot game theory came out, and a lot of people used it to disprove Gregbot. The files of Security Breach show that Freddy claims that Gregory's arm is cut badly, and that he is detecting blood, and the line of "I feel you are broken" was used as censorship. The rationale for this evidence is that Charlie in the books is specifically stated to have fake blood, so if Gregory were a robot, he should have fake blood too, but Freddy is saying that he detects blood, indicating that he is detecting real blood. Whether this is actually true or not is debatable, but what's important for this video is that I did agree with this evidence at the time, and so I stopped believing Gregory was a robot. But I still felt like something was a bit off about Gregory, and eventually I found myself at Step Closer. Just to remind you guys in case you forgot, Step Closer is about a 16-year-old named Pete who tries to scare his younger brother named Chuck with the out-of-order Foxy animatronic. Foxy sings a song about how if you want to be a pirate, you first have to lose an eye and an arm. As time goes on, Pete gets in many situations where he almost loses his eye or his hand. At one point, a fish hook actually got caught under his eye, leaving a big cut there. At the end, he tries running back to Freddy's to end the curse, but gets hit by a truck and dies. His mom had signed him up to be an organ donor, and while he was dead, he was still able to see the world around him as if he was still alive, and he watched as the doctors had to take an eye and an arm from his body. The story is pretty dark, and it's later revealed that Eleanor was the one behind the curse. The idea of a curse was one I found really interesting, as Pete got this curse because he scared his younger brother with Foxy, just like Mike did to the bite victim. And that to me indicated that the spirit of the bite victim could have placed a curse on Mike, which could be part of why the FNaF 4 nightmares happened to Mike. But what I found the most interesting about this idea was the fact that I believe that Glamrock Freddy was Michael Afton at the time, and I also believe that Gregory, while not literally him, was meant to be connected with the bite victim. My idea was that Mike could have possibly died in FNaF 6 before getting the opportunity to free himself from the curse, and that Gregory could have been the representation of the curse, with Freddy protecting him to finally make up for the bite. That may seem like a bit of a leap, but in my opinion the strongest indication that this could have been true was Gregory himself. Remember how I mentioned the censored dialogue earlier? Freddy claimed that Gregory's arm was cut badly. His arm, one of the 2 things of Pete's that was affected by the curse in Step Closer. The other thing of Pete's affected by the curse was his eye, and like I said, there was a point in the story where a fish hook was caught under his eye, leaving a cut there. A cut in the exact same place that one of Gregory's band-aids appears. I think this theory was overall decently strong and made a good amount of sense at the time, but nowadays I don't really think it works, especially since I don't think Mike possesses Freddy anymore. I do think Gregory probably is still meant to represent the bite victim, robot or not, but I don't think he's meant to be a literal curse. Overall though, I think that this was a decent theory for the time, it just doesn't make that much sense anymore. The next old theory of mine that I want to discuss was surrounding a story in the 9th Fazbear Frights book, that being Jump for Tickets. In a book that had 2 stories and an epilogue that weren't really that good, Jump for Tickets was a much needed addition. The other 2 stories were interesting in terms of lore, but I didn't really like them quite as much. But Jump for Tickets did have at least one mystery that intrigued a lot of people, and that was the identity of Coils the Clown. Not that many people talk about this anymore, but after reading this story myself, I thought I should probably chip in my idea for who Coils was, and I think the idea I presented actually made a lot of sense then, and I still think it could very well be true. In a game theory after this book came out, MatPat went on a little side tangent about how the puppet was originally named Coils the Clown. This has become somewhat of a meme in some parts of the FNaF community, as it's very clearly not true. MatPat suggesting it mostly relied on the puppet just being a clown, which is true, and the stripes, which are different colors, and in the video were deliberately changed. The idea that the puppet and Coils were the same animatronic also doesn't make sense, since outside of simply having stripes which don't even match, the designs of the two aren't remotely similar. However, while Coils and the puppet are not literally the same, they do have some very interesting similarities that I thought at the time and still think are worth paying attention to. Coils is designed to watch after the kids at the ticket pulverizer. He is a security device, similar to the puppet. Throughout the story, he is trying to prevent Colton from dying, but he fails to protect him, just like the puppet with Charlotte, and like Charlotte, Colton seems to have possessed Coils after he died. If you don't remember, in the security puppet minigame from FNaF 6, the puppet did not have tears, only getting the tears after Charlotte died and possessed her. With Coils, tears somehow form in his eyes and he is really sad after Colton dies, which prompts Aiden, Colton's little cousin, to hug him as he tells Coils not to be sad like Colton usually is, and mentions that he was planning to buy a gift for Colton with the tickets that he was saving up, and Coils hugs Aiden back. It seems very implied that Colton possessed Coils after he died, which makes his story very similar to that of Charlotte. I don't believe Coils himself is meant to be the puppet though. I think Coils is meant to represent the animatronic that Ennard's mask came from, and the reason I believe that is because he is a clown and has lemon and lime colored stripes just like the hat that Ennard wears. I think the idea that the physical Coils animatronic is meant to represent the animatronic Ennard's mask came from, but that the lore is meant to be more in line with the puppet makes a lot of sense. Another idea I came up with based on this though was that Ennard could actually have been a Funtime puppet animatronic. Since the puppet doesn't have a Funtime form that we are aware of, and Coil seems to represent both the puppet and Ennard, and on top of that there's a Funtime version of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and even technically Golden Freddy if you count Yendo, it would sort of make sense that the puppet has a Funtime version as well, and that would explain where Ennard's mask even came from. There was never really that much evidence for it, I just thought that it would make sense since there's a good amount connecting Coils to both. I don't really think that part of the theory is that strong anymore, as there's not a whole lot suggesting it, but that's not really anything stopping it from being true, especially since both are clowns and the shape of their heads are relatively similar. But either way, this theory was one that I think still holds up pretty well. The final old theory of mine that I want to talk about is an idea I came up with for Find Player 2. Towards the end of Fazbear Frights, I began doing summaries on each of the stories, but in Book 11, the second story, Kids at Play, was one of my least favorites, despite its interesting lore implications. Because I didn't like Kids at Play, I didn't have the motivation to read Find Player 2, and while I ended up really liking Find Player 2, I just didn't read it until a while later in February of 2022. But this story actually further implied a theory that I'd come up with a while earlier. I'm sure you guys remember the whole Evan thing. No, I don't mean me, I mean the theory that the bite victim's name was Evan. Whether or not the bite victim's name really is Evan is another topic entirely, but what I want to talk about is another theory the creator of the Evan theory had come up with, Wolfie 1740 Kingdom. After the whole Evan thing, I went to see what other theories he had, and one of them was pretty interesting to me. It was the theory that the FNaF 4 kids, the Plush Trap Kid, the Pigtail Girl, and the Toy Girl, and the Balloon Kid, and the Laughing Kid, who also seems to be the Freddy Bully, were all children killed in the missing children incident. I honestly don't remember the evidence for that theory very well, and it's probably not true, except for maybe the Toy Girl being Susie, which I do think is plausible. But Find Player 2 actually serves some pretty interesting evidence for the idea of the Freddy Bully being Fritz, the kid who possesses Foxy. In the story, Mary Jo has a teddy bear which could connect her to the bite victim, but since the story was more associated with the missing children incident, I believed it was probably more than that. Since it's a teddy bear, I thought it was likely that she was being associated with Freddy. Since the story is all about Amy's friend going missing, and Amy in this story returns to Freddy's years later to investigate, which may or may not be meant to connect her with Michael Afton, I believe that this story was trying to indicate that one of Mike's friends was a missing child, and since Mary Jo had a teddy bear, I believed that the Freddy Bully was meant to be. There's more than just that though. The Freddy Bully is strangely distinct from the other FNaF 4 bullies in that he's the only one who appears outside of the Bite of 83 minigame, and he's also the only one whose eyes do not glow white. His appearance outside of the Bite of 83 also has him laughing at the bite victim, and the fact that Mary Jo's laugh is specifically called out to be weird seemed to connect the two to each other. It may seem a bit weird for him to be possessing Foxy and not Freddy despite wearing a Freddy mask, but if you think about it, it kinda makes sense. Pizza Party already shows Gabriel to be 7 when he died, when the Freddy bully is clearly a teenager, and in FNAF 2, you wear a Freddy mask, and at one point you play as Mike using the name Fritz Smith. Think about that. Mike during FNAF 4 wore a Foxy mask, and in FNAF 2 wears a Freddy mask, while the Freddy bully wore a Freddy mask in FNAF 4, and therefore it makes sense for him to be Foxy in FNAF 2. Essentially, they swap roles. Not to mention, Mike using the name Fritz could be explained by him being friends with someone named Fritz, which would make sense to be the missing kid, possibly even being Mike's motivations for going to FNAF 2, to investigate his friend Fritz's disappearance at the first Freddy's. Now, I think that the evidence for this theory is actually pretty good, and I actually really like the idea. There's just a few relatively major problems with it that stop me from believing it today. First of all, the Freddy bully in 1983 is probably around 14 to 16. By 1985 in the missing children incident, he'd be 16 to 18. Into the Pit has Oswald, who is 10. Note that none of the missing kids are older than he is, not to mention the fourth closet and the FNAF movie showing Fritz to be a little kid like the other missing kids, and also showing him to be a ginger and not have brown hair. On top of that, I feel like it would be really weird for a teenager to be lured in by Spring Bonnie. Mike's motivations also don't seem to have anything to do with a friend going missing, instead likely having more to do with William himself and atoning for his past mistakes with the bite of 83. So while I can totally see why I believe this theory, and I think the evidence is actually pretty good and the idea overall is just really cool, I don't think the theory overall can really be true. But those are all 3 of the old theories of mine that we'll be talking about in today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and stay tuned for future videos in this series. I'll also be doing a brand new theory video in the near future covering a theory I've talked about in 2 videos in the past, now talking about it once again using new evidence and explaining the evidence better. I recognize I've been a little lacking in theories recently, but don't worry, I still got plenty more to share with you guys soon. But that's all, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!